how did Bernie Sanders and AOC become mainstream figures? And it's very easy for me to identify. It was the financial crisis. We predicated our defense of markets for so many years, not on the morality of markets, not on the advancement of the human person, not on that markets facilitate their being created in the image of God with dignity to produce things. We defended markets on the basis of they're more efficient.
We've seen in recent years a resurgence of people talking about socialism as acceptable, as a good idea. I know that it is a very, very, very bad idea. But maybe my first question then is, why do you suppose that in a country like this that ought to know better, we have so many people suddenly open to the idea that free market capitalism is bad for the poor, bad for everybody, and socialism is good? Where does that preposterous idea come from? And feel free to drink some water.
I think that it's the reason I wrote the book, that idea comes from a lack of first principles and first things underlying our defense of free markets. Now, one thing I will say, I try not to use the word capitalism much. And a lot of times people use a word and we know why they use it. This is one I'm trying to push back on a little. Like, I understand the left hijacked the word liberal. I prefer we keep that word. I want a liberal society, meaning a free society. I don't like that they stole that word. But capitalism was never our word. It was Marx's word for the ideology of Adam Smith.
Okay, pause. That is something I never heard before. It was Karl Marx who coined the term as a pejorative.
Absolutely a pejorative.
Capitalism, the capitalists are the one who hold the capital and crush the workers. They are bad. We are noble.
It was an implied class envy term and certainly a class struggle pitting those who own capital against humanity, where my entire belief about free enterprise, my entire enthusiasm for what free markets have done to advance the cause of a more advanced civilization, a better society, higher quality of life, is rooted in the human person. So what we do when we use the word capitalism is, I think, sometimes sort of concede a point that what I believe capital is an important tool. Let's call it a means, but it's not the end. Capital accumulation is a means to an end, and the end is this cause of a human flourishing, a shalom, a better life. I'm all for all those things. The term capitalism is a bit restrictive in my mind.
So what's the term that you use?
Free enterprise.
Okay.
The free society. I love Father Sirico at the Acton Institute refers to the free and virtuous society. That's the struggle we're in right now, is those who believe freedom and virtue are in a tension, which I believe they are, but then I want to hold them in tension. I want to celebrate the tension because I know that you cannot have one without the other. Now, you wrote a book in a similar theme, more tied to the political reality, cultural reality our founding fathers talked about, if you can keep it. But here's the thing. When it comes to markets, when it comes to a defense of freedom of exchange, people trying to have a more prosperous life, I believe that freedom and virtue are pro-cyclical. Right now, we're running into people on the left and even some now on this quote-unquote new right that believe, no, we have to have less freedom to get more virtue. And of course, there's always been this Ayn Randian camp or more secular camp that says virtue's less important and let's have more freedom. I think it's both and always and forever.
Listen, I agree almost violently. And I do, in my book, If You Can Keep It, The Forgotten Promise of American Liberty, I do mention the the market aspect of this because to me, listen, this is one of the reasons it's a joy to have you on the program here because everyone needs to understand this. This is basic. It's as basic as it gets. Everyone needs to understand that people can elect, everybody voted, and we chose a dictatorial monster. In other words, unless you have virtuous people operating, the kind of free government can quickly eat itself and destroy itself. Similarly with the market. The free market, the idea that the free market will always give us better stuff. No, no, no. If bad people, they just want better pornography and better drugs, the free market will deliver that. You need virtue in the middle of all of this. You need good people. So if you have basically good people, then the free hand of the market will deliver wonderful things. If you have basically good people, you will deliver wonderful leaders. You'll elect good representatives and stuff. So the idea that we live in a world where we even have to make this case, you'd think that most Americans would already know this, but we don't.
And the reason why is, how do people become good people, Eric? This is a fundamental difference. It is theological, but I'll ignore that. It's philosophical. The left believes man is born good and becomes corrupted by bad things. Whether these days it's race and class and gender, where people of my worldview, your worldview, believe that we were born with original sin, and moral formation comes from family, church, community. We have to have institutions that help form people morally. So do you get better institutions to create better moral formation with less liberty or more liberty? Or more liberty? See, this is the problem. If you take away liberty as a way of trying to promote virtue, you're going to undermine virtue. Because, I'm sorry, you're not going to keep religious liberty without economic liberty, right?
Well, see, it's all. This is the other thing, is that it's all, we've had, John Zmirak talks about this all the time on this program. There's no way around it that when you undermine one kind of liberty, eventually it all goes away. And we have to raise a generation of Americans that understands this. Yeah. Because you really cannot have America unless you have most Americans kind of getting this and going along with this. And one of the reasons you're on the program here is because we have had such a hard push in the opposite direction in the last number of years, where people try to demonize the free market as, oh, that's just rich people wanting to get richer and crush the poor. And you and I would say exactly the opposite, that the whole point of it is that we want the rising tide to lift all boats. That's the way it's supposed to work. We can talk about crony capitalism. There's ways that this can go wrong, but it's not the free market. When we come back, we're talking to David Bahnsen. Don't go away. Americans really need to understand this, because if you don't understand this, you can't really have a culture where you have a free market flourishing and virtue encouraged. That won't happen unless most American citizens buy into this. Yeah.
So there's a quick history that I think has played out in recent times. This wasn't super controversial when Reagan was president. The economy was booming. There was a general enthusiasm for markets. There was a general patriotism in the country. And people say, well, how did Bernie Sanders and AOC become mainstream figures? And it's very easy for me to identify. It was the financial crisis. We predicated our defense of markets for so many years, not on the morality of markets, not on the advancement of the human person, not on that markets facilitate their being created in the image of God with dignity to produce things. We defended markets on the basis of they're more efficient. And they are, but then all of a sudden the financial crisis came in and caused people to rethink it. And Bernie is a very capable spokesperson for socialism. He's funny. He has that kind of shtick about him. The media jumped onto him. AOC is young and charismatic and used social media effectively. So it doesn't surprise me at all that what I thought was settled in the 20th century, the failure of totalitarianism, of Marxism, of socialism, that it got a second wind post-crisis. But I blame us. I blame the right for defending markets the wrong way. I think efficiency is a pragmatic byproduct of markets. So they distribute risk and reward. They allocate resources better than alternatives. But fundamentally, I start with the fact that all people, not 53% of people, all people were created by God to produce. That if there'd never been sin, I still think there'd be an iPhone. I still think there'd be a modern transportation system, because God made us to just use our imaginations that are elevated. He created us very good. We're better than the animal kingdom. We're better than the vegetation. We have souls. We can create beauty. We can add our ideas to the raw materials God gave us. That's my starting point for defending markets.
Well, it's interesting. You know, speaking as somebody who I would describe myself as politically conservative, theologically conservative, there's nothing worse than people sort of on your side disagree on some fundamental. In other words, if somebody says, I'm pro-America and I'm pro whatever it is, Trump or GOP, or I'm pro whatever but they don't do it in a way that does justice to the heart of why I love America. Yeah. They're kind of like, you know, America is better than the other countries, and you know, in other words, it would be America. How do I put this? In other words, my idea of why I love America is because America has always been a nation for others, because America has always held up the torch of liberty for everyone. It's an idea. It's a beautiful idea. It's not a America first and only and let everybody else drop dead. On the contrary, if we are great and strong in this country, it will end up blessing those beyond our shores, and more people will come to our shores. Exactly the same thing when you're talking about the free market. The free market is not well represented by, you know, people like Gordon Gekko who just say greed is good. No, 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 no. That's a lie and a distortion. It is a mischaracterization as fundamental as it gets. But those bad ideas bleed into the culture and become part of how folks like Bernie and AOC demonize people who are talking about the free market. And
pretend you're in your 20s over the last decade and now in your young 30s, and your experience as a young adult is going off to college and taking on $300,000 of student debt, getting out of college and getting a job that most of your friends who didn't go to college could also get. When you started, you know, young adult life, your parents were about to lose their home in a housing crisis. Now, 15 years later, you have a good job and you can't afford to buy a home. So from student debt to housing to a lot of these things, it's easy to play into this feeling that the markets aren't working, systems rigged. Now, of course, I can easily walk through a young person in good faith and explain how every one of those things are not market's faults and are government fault, are intervention in the market fault. But you have to have that conversation. I try to do it winsomely. I want to be one of these people who's persuading folks, not fighting with folks. But you mentioned about our love of America needs to be rooted in idea. And sometimes people getting the right conclusion but with wrong premises is more dangerous. Look, do you want to defend marriage apart from it being a commitment? I don't. Do you want to defend America apart from it being this idea about liberty and so forth, that we know the unique governed by the people principles of our country? When we defend markets as more people will get richer, we do not do justice to the full-orbed reality of markets. Right. A market is just two people in a free exchange, and I always try to reduce things. I do this in the book. I do it in the video series. Two people on a desert island. And really, nothing works if it doesn't work with two people on a desert island. And that's, to me, what we're trying to do. Allocate scarce resources. God made the world a certain way. Markets are the right way for us to freely administer and ultimately cultivate our gifts for the advancement of humanity.
Well, you know, again, it gets down to, we talk about virtue. I saw this, we all saw this happen in the 90s when people who misunderstood this issue, the issue of liberty, the issue of virtue, the issue of markets, whatever, they said, oh, China's opening up, and if they have a free market, that will instantly lead to virtue and to liberty. And you think, well, no. There's this thing called sin and greed, and free markets don't automatically lead, and this is what I guess libertarians and Randians seem to think, that free markets are like a magic thing that leads to everything good. And you realize, no, 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 no. If you do not have virtue at the heart of it, then that simply won't happen. And we've seen, I mean, I see the naivete in the 90s on, you know, what I would call the liberal side. They had naivete about the evil of the Communist Party in China. Very naive. They were naive about the Soviet Union. On the right side, it was naivete about what the markets can do apart from virtue, that they're just automatically going to deliver freedom to China. There's no stopping it. Now, 20 years later, 25 years later, you look at it and you think, how'd that go?
Yeah, and I would argue that anyone who believed economic freedom automatically created political freedom or civic freedom needs to study history better. But see, Milton Friedman, who's sort of the patron saint of defending markets in the 20th century, already told us that economic freedom does not automatically. However, Eric, it is a necessary condition.
Oh, I would certainly agree. Oh, absolutely.
But it is necessary. Yeah. And so all things being equal, I would like totalitarian countries to have economic freedom. And I would like it to parlay into greater political and civic freedom. But the notion that we'll automatically do so is, as you say, naive. Now, within our own country, which is my greater concern, I'm not as concerned about China acting like China as I am America acting like China. And
okay.
Even though it's on
great, very important statement. Yeah. Very important. And unfortunately, we're living at a time when, even a few years ago, this was not the issue that it is today. This is very serious, what you just said.
I think that it's it's a bigger issue of responsibility here because the Chinese people know not what they miss, and America knows darn well what is being taken from it at different moments in time, whether it was the religious liberties taken away during the COVID atrocity or the kind of marginalization of economic freedom that we continue to live through and tolerate. And to those who much is given, much is required. We started in this country with the trifecta of liberty from civic, political, and economic, and to surrender some of it is far more problematic.
Well, again, and this is why we have to talk about this, and this is why I'm thrilled to promote your video series, No Free Lunch, and also the book, No Free Lunch. When we come back, I want to talk to you about some of these economic truths that you highlight in the book, There's No Free Lunch, because I think we do need to remind people of what some of these things are. Again, living in the culture in which we currently live, it's easy to forget these things because you only hear the other side over and over and over again, pushing the lies and really the mischaracterizations of what the market is and what a free market is.